Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush. And today I'm very happy to have Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions on the channel. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to finally get on here, and I'm looking forward to talking about the album that I suggested for you.
Great. Well, why don't we go straight into it, and I'll get you to tell everybody the album that you have picked for me, a little bit about that album and why you specifically picked this album for me to listen to.
Sure. Well, as everyone knows, we've been helping you get into Rush, and so far you've done, I believe, Permanent Waves, Power Windows, and Hold Your Fire.
That's correct.
So
yes.
very, very good cross section of '80s Rush there. When you asked me, I thought, well, it would be, not that I think Rush have any bad albums and, peaks and valleys albums, but I thought it would be so obvious to go with something like 2112 or Moving Pictures. But I said, I thought to myself, let's go all the way to the end and demonstrate that this band never phoned it in. And even up to the very last recordings they made, were still making some of their best music ever. So I went with 2012's, turned out to be swan song for Rush, Clockwork Angels. Their very first full concept album. Lazy journalists will refer to 2112 and sometimes Hemispheres as concept albums, but they aren't. They're half concept, half of a side of, quote unquote, regular songs. So this one tells a story from start to finish. It's broken up into individual tracks, and I think it's one of the best swan songs a band has ever left us with. And I thought, yeah, let's show you what they were doing right up until the end.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you say about Hemispheres and 2112 and how they're sort of considered to be concept albums by the press, even though they're not really. Kind of reminds me of the press's reaction to Jethro Tull's Aqualung. The press often said that that was a concept album, and Ian Anderson was always like, well, no, there's a few songs that sort of share a theme, but on the whole, it's not a whole concept album. So it sounds like it's sort of that sort of thing with those albums.
Yeah, I think it's just they look at the cover, they look at the back cover, and the overreaching concept has to do, the album artwork tends to have something to do with the album, whatever the sidelong song happened to be.
Yeah.
And they just went with it. But really, yeah, the second sides of both of those albums are totally unrelated to any story or overarching concept. But this time around, they decided to go for it, I guess. They just had a concept that worked. So.
Fair enough. Well, it was really interesting listening to this album because, as you say, it's the last album that they did. And it's a different sound from what I was used to with the 80s Rush. But it's
very really different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a lot of keyboards at all on this album.
No, but it's I really, really enjoyed this album. So let's sort of go through it track by track. I'll sort of give my reaction to each track, and then you can fill me in where I might have missed something or that sort of thing. So the first song is Caravan. And I said that there's like a really atmospheric intro that goes into a really great riff. And that's like going to be an ongoing theme for me in this album, is the riffs on this album are just so really good. They're crunchy, but they're complex and they're interesting, which I really like. I noticed that Geddy on this album, and it starts on this song, is singing in a lower register than he is in the earlier stuff. I don't know if that's because his voice was going. I never got to see them live, so I don't know if he could sort of still belt the early stuff out in concert at this stage or not, or whether it was just an artistic choice that he made. So I don't know. Maybe you can fill me in on that.
Well, it's very much a deepening of the vocal cords for sure. And if you were, once you fill in the blanks and get the catalog all the way through, like most vocalists, the ranges they write in tend to go down.
Yeah.
You know, he Geddy attempted to sing the songs in concert to, I'm going to say, mixed results. It's kind of a sore spot. I don't really like, they're one of my favorite bands, but I'm glad to say that when I saw them, which was back in 2004, his vocals were still,
Yeah.
But I will say this, he never put in a bad vocal performance in the studio. And I think that, even at the age of, pushing 60, which they kind of all were on this album, they still captured good performances from all of them on here. And yeah, but it's definitely in a lower range starting in than you would have been accustomed to, for sure.
Yeah. I did note with this song that it's definitely harder rocking and less keyboardy than the 80s albums, which, you've already mentioned. I noted there's some really funky bass from Geddy on this song, which I really, really liked. I also love the riffing on this song has a sort of a knottiness. It's not just a basic riff. There's really sort of some complexity to it, which I really like. And there's a nice noisy solo from Alex on this one. And the other thing I noted was there's a line in it that keeps cropping up, which is the line, "I can't stop thinking big," which I thought to myself, that could be Rush's motto, couldn't it?
Yeah, it really could. That could have been their credo all the way through their career. They never wanted to settle. They always wanted to push themselves. And even if they had record company pressure, people telling them to do more commercial sounding music, they always did whatever they wanted to do. And they always had a bigger concept, not as a concept album, how they wanted their music to be presented and sound. They've always thought big. They've never said, well, let's just do this. They've always, had that broad scope of what they wanted to do every time they went into the studio, right up till the end.
Yeah. No, I definitely got that with this album too. Yeah. So the next song is BU2B. I don't know if that's how you say it or whether there's a specific way to say that. Or I noted that it's another one with an atmospheric intro into a really heavy riff this time. I'd been told, that Rush had its metal moments, and I hadn't really heard those much on those 80s albums, but I'm definitely hearing it on this one.
You wouldn't hear it on the 80s album. You wait until you get to the likes of Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. You'll hear some songs that were as heavy as anything that came out in that time.
Yeah, I think I'm coming up to Caress of Steel in May, so that should be an interesting one.
That's going to be a lot for you to take in, but I can't wait to hear what you think of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some heavy riffing on here. This is definitely one of them.
I noted that there were still hints of the synths on this song, but they're very much more there for color rather than sort of being the overall basis of the song as they are often in the 80s stuff. And I noted that the lyric seems to be sort of a critique of sort of blindly following religion. It's this whole album. We'll get into like how I sort of came through the concept as we go with these tracks, because it took me a little bit of time to fully grasp the concept as I was going through it. But I definitely got early on that this was a sort of a spiritual journey kind of album. But this song is the sort of one where they're sort of saying, don't just blindly follow what you're told.
Absolutely. That's the concept of the album is based on a book called Clockwork Angels that Neil Peart wrote with Kevin J. Anderson, which I've actually never read. I got to read it. But there are narrations within the song lyrics that kind of lead you from one passage to another. What I like about this is that you don't necessarily have to know the concept. You can just put it on and it's just a good heavy rock album to listen to. But if you do dig into the lyrics, it's BU2B, brought up to believe. And they just kind of shortened it like that. And of course they reprise it later. And even though the story is based on, a character, it's very much autobiographical for Neil Peart. There are so many parallels with his life. This is just a dramatized version of it, but that's definitely, I think, collectively where their heads are at.
Yeah.
But the song just what a just a slamming song.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, really, really.
It's really, really, really fun to listen to.
Yeah. So the next song's the title track, Clockwork Angels. And this is where I sort of was getting really into the idea that this concept has a real sort of a steampunk feel to it, which I really, really like. Because I've always liked that as a genre of sort of literature and film and that sort of thing.
Then you should probably get the Clockwork Angels novel then, because that's totally steampunk.
Oh, cool. No, I've always been a big fan of like Terry Gilliam films, and like Terry Gilliam films always have that sort of steampunk feel, especially a film like Brazil. You know, sort of like futuristic, but yet kind of retro at the same time.
I've heard steampunk described as the future as it was thought to have been.
Yes.
You know, machines that were sort of bigger than they needed to be, but you know, or H.G. Wells, that's another name that comes up a lot. These ornate, really large objects that become part of everyday life. This is totally set in a steampunk world. And it goes into the artwork and the whole concept of it.
Or the other author I think of with that sort of thing is Jules Verne.
Maybe that's who I meant. Maybe I didn't mean H.G. Wells, but Jules Around the World in 80 Days. Is that...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I said musically, this one has a bit of a more proggy feel to it, which again really appeals to me because I've always been a sort of prog head since sort of mid 80s, while still rocking really hard. So really,
it's actually the longest. I'm just looking at it. It's the longest song on the album.
Yeah,
7.5 minutes long.
Yeah, there's no sort of real epics on this album, but I mean the album as a whole is, you know, almost one piece of work. So, and I noted in this song, they really are incredible musicians, these three guys. You know, they're just masters of their instruments, all three of them.
I love the dynamics in the song, you know, and that dynamic only comes from playing together for years and years and years. Yeah, but one of my favorite moments happens in the song when Geddes, you know, the last time I think he sings "As If to Fly," and his voice kind of trails off, and then they're da-da-da-da-da-da, like they're right back, just slamming it with the riff again. You don't do things like that on the fly. You have to almost telepathically know what the other guys are going to do, and you know, it's like, okay, now we're into it. And you know, as a band that's been around as long as they have been, this album, it doesn't sound like a bunch of 60-year-old guys. It just sounds like just master musicians.
Exactly. Yeah. The one thing I really noted is this has been an ongoing theme for me throughout all of these Rush albums that I've been listening to, is that Alex Lifeson, he continues to amaze me as a technically proficient but incredibly tasteful soloist. You know?
Yeah. And I think Alex defines knowing when to play and when not to play, and knowing just the right things to play. And he can play one guitar and make it sound like three. Yeah.
And I noted too on this song that Neil Peart's drums just sort of rumble and thunder, which gives it a really, you know, contributes to the atmosphere of this song, which I think is really, really great. Yeah. So the next song is The Anarchist. And I said the drums at the very beginning of this song almost have a kind of surf rock feel to them. You know, they've got that.
It's like a Wipeout. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I noted that this song musically is a little more straightforward than the first sort of three songs, which is fine. I mean, you need to have a bit of breathing room in an album like this, I think. I'm assuming like the Anarchist is supposed to be one of the antagonists in the story. I'm not really sort of fully getting it, but the strings on this song are a really nice touch, I think. And I just wrote in my notes that like with a third of the way in, and I'm really, really enjoying this album so far. So
it's a very powerful song musically and lyrically. Yeah, lyrically, it's you get a look inside the mind of this individual who thinks that he's, he thinks very highly of himself, and why doesn't the world recognize my genius? Oh, and they're going to know all about me. And that's kind of what it's about, if you read the lyrics, of course they're not coming to me right now, but Geddy sings them with, there's anger. The way he delivers those lyrics. I mean, Geddy is practically an actor, because he doesn't write a lot of the lyrics. He has written lyrics, but he interprets the lyrics, and he has to feel them as if they're his own thoughts. But he really gets into the character. When he's singing, I was so strong, and it's like a defiance. And musically, it's wonderful. It's classic Geddy bass lines. Do 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 do, like that's a classic Geddy bass line, and then it just stops up for those chopped riffs, da 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 da, like that's very old school Alex Lifeson. I mean, that reminds me of something like Xanadu, and without sounding exactly like it, but yeah, it's a really, it goes to a lot of places. It's almost 7 minutes long too. And really, they haven't let up much. It's still pretty heavy for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one's really, we're digging into the lyrics for this one. I think you appreciate it a little bit more. Now the story's really starting to move along.
Yeah. So we get into the next song, which is Carnies. I did have a note in my notes here where I said that at this stage, I was finding the story a little bit hard to follow. But I'm often like that with concept albums. They take me a while to actually fully grasp the concept, because they're not like linear, like a book or a Hollywood blockbuster or that sort of thing. But
I have to listen through a couple of times, and then okay, let's get the lyrics out and actually read what the lyrics are, but just to get used to the music.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Carnies are sort of more of the sort of characters that our hero is sort of meeting along the way.
Yeah, well, what happens in the Anarchist is I'm gonna get this. I don't have the lyrics in front of me, but basically, this Anarchist throws not a bomb, but some sort of device, because there's a line, such a dangerous device, and basically he's, it's going to hurt a bunch of people, and our hero, whose name escapes me, I think it's Thomas. His name's some Hardy. Boy, isn't that awful? It went right out of my head. But anyway, he ends up catching this thing that's thrown, and everybody looks and they think he's the one. He's the troublemaker. So he runs away, and he joins a traveling carnival. So that's what Carnies is about.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But musically, I thought I like how it's sort of like really sort of crunchy in the verse sections, and then it goes into a sort of a lighter sounding chorus.
I just remembered his name. It's Owen Hardy.
Oh, there you go.
They call him Owen Hardy because as they were writing, they kept just saying our hero, our hero. Well, we got to give this guy a name. His initials are OH, Owen Hardy. That's where that came from.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because I keep referring to him as our hero through my notes.
Yeah.
So
well, that's they did too until they, and it never says his name so it really doesn't matter.
But the other thing I was saying is that this album so far for me, as I said at the beginning, it's really, really riffy, rather than sort of being built on like chord progressions or whatever. It's very much built on riffs, but it's still complex. It's not like the sort of basic riff rock that you might hear. It's a really heady combination, and I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, even when Rush do like a really cool, what you might, your average guitar player could say, well, I think I could play that, but they never do it for too long. They'll throw a twist into it. It'll be in a different time signature, or there'll be a really busy bass line underneath of it or something like that. Yeah, they don't do basic unless they've determined that the particular part of a song calls for basic, then they keep it basic until it's not anymore.
Yeah. All right, so the next song is Halo Effect. And I said that this one sort of starts off sounding like it's going to be an acoustic ballad. But then the chorus sort of kicks in and it's really sort of hard and rocking again. And again, the strings in this song, really nice. They're used really, really well so far on this album, the strings. And I did have a question, which was on the tour for this album, did they actually take some string players out with them to perform, or did they use like backing tapes or whatever?
If I've got this correct, I believe they did a fairly standard tour at first, but then they went out with a string section.
Yeah.
And or maybe they just had a string section for certain, like for the middle of the show. But I've got a DVD of it. It's called Clockwork Angels Live. And even on the older songs, the strings work incredibly well. Sometimes they don't, when bands do the orchestra stuff, it sounds like, as our friend Martin Popoff would say, two radio stations playing at the same time, fighting with each other. But on the album, I believe the strings are by David Campbell, who does a lot of string arrangements. I believe he's Beck's father.
Okay.
Not Jeff Beck. But,
no, Beck.
but Beck Hansen. But yeah, just the right amount without sounding saccharine. It's kind of a ballad on the album, and at this point, so our hero Owen Hardy falls in love with one of the dancers at the carnival, and sort of I guess it is sort of unrequited. She doesn't feel the same way, so he kind of gets burned a little bit. So the title Halo Effect is kind of clever because, he puts her on this pedestal, thinks of her as an angel. Well, she rejects him. Now he's feeling, you could call it a halo effect, because this person that he built up in his mind to be so perfect is flawed like everyone else. And it's really, really interesting, because I highly recommend it if you're any kind of, if you enjoy a good read. For anybody, even if you're not a Rush fan, but Neil's book Ghost Rider, which he wrote in the wake of his twin tragedies of losing his daughter and then his wife within a year, is one of the most compelling books I've ever read. Just a story of how somebody builds himself back up from absolute nothing. But before he went on this long bike trip all around North America and into Mexico and all the way to Alaska and back, every corner of Canada and the US. And along the way, he ends up meeting the woman who would become his second wife, Carrie, and they would have a daughter. But on the way, he does have, a brief relationship with another woman. And it basically plays out the exact way the song does. She wasn't who he thought she was, and he was hurt. So yeah, when I first heard this song, I remember thinking, I know exactly where this is coming from. This is very thinly veiled autobiographical for anyone who's read Ghost Rider. So, but again, you don't need to know any of that to just enjoy it for a good song. I think Geddy sings very, very well in this song. It's very heartfelt. It's very heartfelt, and it really does a good job because Rush aren't a band you think of as doing ballads. And that's one of the things that we love about them, is because they never did the predictable thing. But when they did, they were generally quite good. And they were never cheesy or over saccharine. And this just fits in with the story so well. So and it's a nice, and by this point in time, it's a nice breather on the album, right? You kind of need a little kind of need a little rest. Yeah,
because he's sort of leading into the second half of the album, sort of act 2, as it were. So yes. No, I agree with you with that. It is a good breather. It's funny you talk about Rush ballads, because I've had sort of 2 or 3 on the 3 albums that I've had so far, and they've tended to be my lesser favorite songs on the albums. But we're going to get to another ballad at the end of this album, which really does change my mind about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
It's definitely not. Ballads are definitely not their specialty, and they would be the first to tell you that.
But so we get into the sort of act 2, as it were, with 7 Cities of Gold. And I sort of noted that the second half of this album starts really strong, straight out of the gate. And I also noted that I'm starting to get the story a bit better by this stage, that it's sort of a young man on a literal and figurative journey of spiritual discovery. Just another cool riff-heavy song with a little bit of Hammond organ thrown in, which I really like. There's a nice sort of little extra flavor to this song. And the instrumental bit in the middle almost sounded like sort of heavy Pink Floyd to me. Definitely has that sort of
very atmospheric. Yeah.
Yes, but heavy still.
Yes.
You know. And I said that Neil is on fire in this song. His fills are just like otherworldly in this song. They're just great.
Yeah, like, you know, it's pretty amazing the standard they were able to uphold all this time. Yeah, 7 Cities of Gold is just slamming. I mean, yeah, it's another good heavy one on here, and you know, halfway through the album, I remember the first time I listened to it thinking, I think I'm gonna like this whole thing. I haven't heard anything that's made me, you know, either say, well, I don't care for this one so much, or made me kind of lose interest and want to skip to the next song. Everything's just been pulling me along. And it's at this point in the story, I mean, the 7 Cities of Gold were mythical. This is where sort of real life, say, mythology and this fantasy mythology mix, because, you know, there was this legend of these 7 cities of gold. They were never found, but that's what they're at this point. He's doing something different with his life. He leaves the carnival, and he's off at another stage. I mean, it's very metaphorical for, I think, the life of a touring musician, and especially Neil, someone that, you know, led a very, very unique life, because he was a person that did not enjoy the spotlight, and yet he was in the spotlight, the limelight, if you like. And the ordeals he went through just to continue living. You know, that's why he started biking in between shows, and then motorbiking, and then doing things to keep himself occupied. So he did a lot of things in his lifetime. You know, that's like the lyric in Marathon. You can do a lot in a lifetime if you don't burn out too fast. And one of my favorite quotes is that he would, you know, he'd wake up and say, what is the most awesome thing I could do today? So he may not have, you know, joined the carnival. Of course, going on the road to the rock band is kind of like joining the circus. You know, he may not have searched for, you know, hidden, you know, mythical cities, but he was all over the world traveling, either as a touring musician or on his own. I mean, he'd take these bike trips through Africa and China and all these places. So, you know, he might as well have looked for the 7 cities of gold, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, so the next song is The Wreckers. And the very first thing that I wrote down that was a question for you, and that is, was this a single?
You know, I don't believe it was. So Caravan came out 2 years prior to the release of this album. I have a single that came out on Record Store Day in 2010. Caravan, and the B-side was BUTB. So the first 2 songs on the album, they were actually slightly recorded, remixed for this album, but you can't really tell the differences. So that Caravan was the first official single. And then when the album came out, I believe Headlong Flight was a single. And then they eventually put out a picture disc of The Garden, which we're going to talk about. So I don't believe The Wreckers was a single, but I will tell you, this is my favorite song on this album. And as a matter of fact, a few episodes of mine ago, I did an episode with Ryan Murphy from RushFans, and also Todd Evans, who, you know, we all know Todd. Todd's been on both of our shows. We did a top 10 Rush songs episode, which was hard for me. But The Wreckers, you know, usually it's easier to pick the old stuff because you've lived with it longer. The Wreckers made my top 10. I think it's just an incredible song. It's incredibly catchy, but it's incredibly heavy and dark and all of these things at the same time. It should have been a single. Well,
I noted that it sounds to me like they were going for something a little more radio friendly with this song. You know, it still sounds at home in the context of the rest of the album. It doesn't sort of stick out like a sore thumb or anything, but it just it sounds like it's something that was a little more radio friendly, a little catchier. So
yeah, for sure, it's definitely got it's definitely more, you know, it's more hooky, but I just find that chorus so compelling that all I know is that sometimes you got to be wary. The way Geddy sings that is just masterful. And a fun fact about that song is that when they wrote it, Alex played bass and Geddy played guitar. So Geddy wrote the main melody of the verses, which is why it might strike you as a little bit simpler sounding, is
Yeah,
because you've got two people playing that are playing instruments that each doesn't normally play.
Yeah.
And apparently Nick Raskulins, the producer, wanted them to record it that way, but that was like a bridge too far for them, saying, no, we just wrote it like this. We're gonna stick to what we do best when we record it. But yeah, that's another fun thing. I don't think they'd ever done that before, and this far along in their career, still doing new things. But lyrically, this one is very dark, because it's about, a ship, the seas are troubled, like it's a stormy sea or whatever. They see what they believe is a lighthouse, and oh good, sanctuary, where we're saved, and they're not saved. They're going from one disaster into another, because they've got these people that would have these lighthouses set up where the ships will come in and capsize on rocks or whatever, and then these people would come and loot the ships. So these people are dying or drowning, and these people are stealing from them. So it's like the lowest of the low, thus the title, The Wreckers. So, and the idea is, you think, you see that light in the distance, you think, okay, we're saved. Not necessarily. Beware, be careful. Things are not always as they seem.
The light at the end of the tunnel might be an oncoming train.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I did note that this song has some really nice orchestrations on it too, which I really, really like.
Yes. Yeah.
So the next song is Headlong Flight. I noted that this starts off with this wonderful bass riff that's then doubled up on guitar. Really great intro. The journey part of the concept is really made obvious in this song for me. And the frenetic pace of this song, I said it really gets the blood pumping. It really, really got me going when I was listening to this. And I love how it sort of keeps switching from double time to half time, between sort of verses and choruses and what have you. I also noted that the solo, this has been an ongoing thing for me. As I said, Alex Lifeson, very tasteful soloist. I've sort of noted that, he's not what I would call a shreddy guitar player. But on this song, he probably gets the closest I've ever heard him so far to doing a sort of shreddy guitar solo.
He's capable of doing just about anything. And he's got some wah-wah pedal on this. Yeah. So this song, lyrically and musically, is a look back. Because once you get to the older Rush, specifically Caress of Steel, the beginning of this song, the drums, the way it stops and starts, will remind you very much of the song Bastille Day, which is the opening track on Caress of Steel, one of their heaviest songs ever. Yeah. And that's on purpose. It's not a carbon copy, but it's to say, hey, we know that you're going to think this sounds like, there's a reason we put this here. The little bit of the drum solo in the middle with the crowd cheering. Yeah. It's their career. It's looking back on their career. And it's Owen Hardy looking back on everything that he's been through. Now, the idea of I wish I could do it all, live it all again, that was a quote from a guy named Freddie Gruber, who was Neil Peart's drum teacher. Who was a lot of people's drum teacher. He was a contemporary of Buddy Rich. Yeah. But Neil started, studying under him in the mid-90s and totally changed his approach to playing the drums. And, he would talk like he'd met everyone and he knew everyone. And he would say, man, I wish I could live it all again. And that's where that comes from. And he's actually, they don't call him Freddie Gruber. I think they called him Friedrich. They kind of play with the name a little bit to make it look more ancient, but that's who it's referring to. Whereas Neil has said, I'm glad to have done it all, but I wouldn't want to do it again. Yeah. So that's where they would differ. But in this case, the character's looking back on his life and basically saying, not all of it was great. I'd still like to do it all over again just for the great parts. Yeah. The other thing I noted with this song is that towards the end of it, Geddy is starting to get into that higher register. He does it very, very well. It's a good performance out of him. Live, latter day live clips. Again, I cringe when I say this, but what I noticed is that it isn't so much that Geddy couldn't hit the notes, is that he would have a hard time hitting the note and then coming back down to the right one. He'd have a harder time controlling the notes, but which is kind of a shame because as a bass player, he was never better.
Yeah.
And even as, you know, he was never exactly what you'd call a front man, but he got more comfortable as the years went on. And in the last, you know, I call it the second act of their career after Neil decided to keep going with Rush and they started again with Vapor Trails. You know, we got another 10 years that we might not have gotten out of them. And on those tours, you could just tell Geddy was having so much fun on stage and hamming it up with the audience like he never had before, because he was very, very mild-mannered, just going to stand back and do my thing. And yeah, he delivered a really good vocal performance on this song. And it was kind of, again, it's that old school, because you're used to Geddy singing way, way, way up in the stratosphere. You wait till you get to Hemispheres. That's like the highest he ever sang. But anyway, but yeah, great song.
I really like that one. Yeah.
Served as the introductory single when the album was released. And I think that's why, because it did hit all of those corners of their, you know, past, present, and future.
Well, it's probably one of my sort of 2 or 3 favorites on this album so far, I'd have to say. Along with 7 Cities of Gold and maybe Caravan and BU2B. I think those 4 are the, you know, the ones that really sort of hit me the best. Speaking of which, we get BU2B2 now, which is a callback, obviously, to the second song on the album, sort of a reprise, as you mentioned earlier. I noted that our hero seems to have hit rock bottom here in this song. And this is just sort of a little bridging song, but it's very, very effective in the concept of the whole album.
Yeah, it's more of an interlude, really. And it's, you know, instead of the sort of nostalgic look back, it's almost like he gets hit with a dose of reality. And so really, yeah, the rest of the album is what now? What do we do now? So yeah, it's a way to, you know, if you went right from Headlong Flight, it wouldn't make any sense. So it's nice that they bring the theme back, but they don't dwell on it too long. It's like a minute and a half, and you know, it continues. Yeah.
So the next one is Wish Them Well, which I said is another sort of slightly simpler song musically, but it still rocks. I noted that this one sort of is probably the one song in this album that's, or the one rocker on this album anyway, that's sort of more built on chords than riffs.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. The middle instrumental section is my favorite part of the song. I absolutely love that bit. The lyrics seem to be advice for our hero in sort of the despondency of the previous song. I don't know, again, I feel like this is sort of another character talking to our hero and sort of giving him a pep talk, as it were.
Either that, or it's like a breaking the fourth wall, and he's basically telling everyone, hey, not everyone's going to agree with you. There's just no point in getting into it. Wish them well. That's all you can do, and just keep going. Yeah, it's well, I think it's good life advice for anyone. But yeah, you're right. It is built more on like fully strummed chords as opposed to power chords. Yeah. A bit like the Wreckers in that way. But apparently this song was one that they had a hard time with, and they almost left it off the album because they weren't getting it right. And eventually they did, like they persevered, but apparently this was the problem child of the album. Like they had a really hard time capturing what they wanted to do with it.
Oh, fair enough. So we finished the album with The Garden. And for me, the lyric here seems to be our hero summing up what he's learned on his journey. And I said, this is the first out and out Rush ballad that I've really, really enjoyed. Like, I know Halo Effect is kind of a ballad, but it still has that really sort of rockin' chorus. So I don't sort of really classify it as an out and out ballad, whereas this one definitely is. But I really, really love this song. It's the perfect end to the album as far as I'm concerned. The instrumentation, including the strings, is just absolutely gorgeous. It just sums up what's been a incredible sort of lyrical and musical journey. And just to sort of finish off, I had to say, this probably, of the 4 Rush albums I've been given so far, this is probably my favorite one of the 4 so far. So thank
Wow.
you so much for recommending this one to me. It's
I'm really
between
glad
this one and Permanent Waves, but
I'm
I
really
think
glad
this
you
one
like
just tops it.
That's really cool. Yeah, The Garden is a song that, you know, it's really hard to listen to now without thinking of Neil's dying.
Yeah.
Neil's passed away in early 2020. You know, even though it was written probably 2010, 2011, and it wasn't intended that way, it was not only the swan song for Neil, but it was the swan song for Rush's recorded career. That's all there's ever going to be. And I think it went out on a high note. It's a beautiful song. The guitar solo is just, you know, and if you're the type to get teary-eyed about things, this is the one that would do it. I mean, it's very touching. The lyrics are wonderful, and the lyrics are about, you know, they're about the concept of the story, but they're so very much about Rush. You know, because they never compromised their music. They always did what they wanted to do. They always had that fan support, and they just never wavered from their path.
Yeah.
You know, so hard to earn, so easily burned. They never sold out in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, I think there's a lot that can be gathered from that. And, you know, because Neil, you know, he was such a private guy, that when the news of his death hit, it hit me really hard. I had no idea. It was like the best kept secret in show business, and that speaks to how much people thought of him. No one leaked it to the press. There were, you know, you didn't hear anything about it. You're just like, he's retired. Let the man retire and enjoy, you know, his wife, his daughter. And it's just a very tragic, you know, it's gone on to become, it's their version of The Show Must Go On by Queen. It's hard to think about it without thinking that this was the last song from the last album before they lost a key member. And, yeah, and what a way to go out. I mean, it just sums everything up so well about the album. And it's nice. It wouldn't have made any sense to go out on a really heavy song, because we've already heard a bunch of those. And it's so very, very different from anything they'd ever done before. But again, it's not over the top. It's not too much. It backs off. It kind of gives you more to think about. I think Geddy sings it very, very well. The way he sings "Hope is what remains to be seen." It's just firing on all cylinders. And you know, the way that it all kind of fades up and fades out, winds to a conclusion, it's just perfect. And, you know, I'm happy to say that they never put out an album that I was less than happy with. I like some more than others, but I think that they finished strong, like really, really strong. And even though I listened to this album a lot, you know, when I first bought it, when Neil passed away, I found myself listening to it a lot more, because I think it's that realization that, look, this is all we're ever going to get. There are no outtakes. All you're going to get are live. You're going to get concerts, which are great. You're not going to get a bunch of it. It's not Prince. It's not Neil Young. It's not Springsteen. They're not sitting on a wealth of unreleased material, because they were such perfectionists. And if they didn't like it, it didn't go on the album, and that was it. They never had extra songs on compilations or soundtracks or anything like that. So I've gained such an appreciation for it. But I'm really glad that as a relatively new fan just getting into them, that this album affected you like it did. I think I must have made a good choice then.
Oh, you made an excellent choice. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for being on this show and doing this for me. Can you please let all my viewers know where they can find you?
Absolutely. Thank you. My Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I've been on YouTube now for since 2014. I'm up over 400 episodes now, and put out a new episode every week. So just, if you go to timsvinylconfessions.com, that takes you right to my YouTube page.
Yep. There will be a link in the description for all my viewers if they want to go and subscribe, and I highly, absolutely recommend that you do.
Thank you.
Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It really does help us out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. Everything's playlisted. So if you want to look at my other episodes of Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush, there's a playlist for those. Or if you want to look at my studio albums ranked shows, there's a playlist for those, or my In Defense of series playlist, etc., etc. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Bicycle Legs on Instagram and Twitter. On Instagram, I'm mostly posting the new records I've picked up or the ones I happen to be listening to at the time, as well as posting channel updates. On Twitter, I talk about anything and everything, but I am definitely giving it more of a music focus. Thanks again, Tim, for doing the show for me, and thank you very much for watching.